Ever since the colonial days, video game consoles have always been in a never-ending war that nobody's truly won so far. Sure, there have been a lot of companies that lost like Sega, and there have been many battles that were won, but thanks to gaming being as popular as it is, there's always been room for multiple consoles to coexist alongside one another, which is more true now than ever before. However, even though a console could still be really successful in third place, no company would ever aim for that, which is why the big three companies are still using every trick in the book to sway customers to their platform, with one of the most effective tactics being to pay third parties money to lock games down to their consoles exclusively, and I think it's pretty obvious why that would entice one to buy a console. But these days, there's fewer and fewer third-party exclusives, and the most console makers can seem to manage are to get timed exclusives, which is not only ridiculous, but I honestly think it's probably doing more harm than good in most ways. Why is that, you ask? Well, sit back in your YouTube viewing chair, drink a tall glass of aged crow milk, press the subscribe button if you haven't already, and allow me, Venezuela's favorite action movie star Cameron all one word, to tell you why timed exclusives are just plain silly. Alright, so back in the 90s, pretty much every console had third-party exclusives, whether it be because Nintendo bullied developers into it in the NES days, or because developers just preferred certain hardware since graphical capabilities made a huge difference back then on every platform. I mean, even multiplats were completely different games sometimes back then, but that had a lot more to do with the fact that different teams worked on these games for whatever reason, I guess. However, for the past 2 or 3 console generations, though, the two most powerful consoles have more or less been the exact same thing as far as what kinds of games you can make. There are still a few third-party franchises that are staying loyal, like Persona, but even they have one foot out the door. So if you ask me, I think it's only a matter of time before they decide to make way more money by going multiplat in the future like everybody else did. Because after all, I highly doubt Sony, or even Microsoft and Nintendo for that matter, could possibly be paying publishers more than they'd be making by allowing their games to be sold on other platforms. Hell, even Microsoft's letting some of their games like Cuphead and Super Lucky's Tale appear on the Switch to make a little extra cash. And I normally give them a lot of grief for not having more exclusives, which they deserve, but if we're talking about games that aren't exactly system sellers, then I actually don't think it's a bad idea to whore them out a tad. Because while that does qualify these games as timed exclusives, most people really didn't think they'd ever go multiplat, so if Xbox owners really wanted them, then they probably would have already bought them by the time they show up elsewhere. And as great of a game as Cuphead is, I'd actually be pretty surprised if it sold a lot of consoles. At any rate though, Microsoft actually owns these games, so it's not like they had to waste money for temporary exclusivity or anything like that, but don't think I'm letting them off the hook though, because they're certainly not above making the mistake of wasting money on timed exclusives. The first time I remember hearing about an exclusive game where they told you up front it was only temporary is when Rise of the Tomb Raider was only on Xbox. I know timed exclusives were a thing before this, like when Resident Evil 4 was touted as a GameCube exclusive, only to show up on the PS2 a little later on, but the internet wasn't as big back then, so even though I'm sure some people knew it was only temporary, most casuals like me at the time had no idea. So in that particular instance, locking a game down for a little bit probably made a huge difference. However, these days, it's certainly not a reason to buy a new console. I mean, if you already own multiple consoles, then you probably would buy a timed exclusive even if it's on a platform you wouldn't ordinarily prefer, sure, but in the case of Rise of the Tomb Raider, my first thought was that I wanted an Xbox One so I could play it, and then I found out it was coming to the PS4 a year later, and I realized it'd actually be better for me to wait, because first of all, there's like 800 good games coming out per month these days, and it's almost impossible to play everything anyway, so what's another year for one game? And not only did I not have a problem with waiting an ass hair longer, but I was well aware that it'd be an even better game once it finally did come to the PS4, which is exactly what ended up happening, because of course it was. I mean, they weren't just gonna release the standard launch version that was already a year old on a new console. Most gamers are way more likely to buy a game when there's a lot of buzz around it being new than they are to buy it once it's old news, which I attribute to the fact that people have been conditioned to expect games that are more than a year old to only cost $20. So including all the DLC to Rise of the Tomb Raider was the only way to really ensure that more people would actually buy the PS4 version. However, not only does this mean that people who bought an Xbox One just to play this game got the worst version of it, but they probably felt pretty stupid if they paid for all the DLC. And not only that, but if you're a physical collector, then all the patches and things like that were already on the PS4 disc, which means that if we all get raptured and lose the internet for good, then the PS4 Tomb Raider fans are gonna be all set, while the Xbox owners are gonna have to live with the glitches. Or, you know, they could just steal a PS4 from an abandoned Circuit City or Funko Land because there's hell on Earth, but you get what I'm saying. I think it's pretty obvious that Rise of the Tomb Raider probably didn't sell very many Xbox consoles, but you might think that it at least led to more people buying the Xbox version after it's all said and done, but despite an 11-month head start, the game actually sold 60% better on PlayStation. Obviously, a big factor is that Sony has a much bigger install base, but while the timed exclusive did probably lead to more copies being sold on the Xbox One than it would have otherwise, at the end of the day, the game clearly didn't sell well enough to justify locking it down for a little bit. And I'm pretty goddamn sure the same could be said for all the other timed exclusives in recent memory. Exclusive games used to make people say, man, I really need to buy that console. But seeing as how it's pretty much impossible to pay most developers more money than they'd make by going multiplat, the most you could get these days are timed exclusives, which at best makes people say, man, that's really lame, I have to wait. Dang it. Like I said, it might lead to slightly higher software sales in the short term for people who already own the console that get certain games first, but is it really worth paying so much money for? I mean, to be fair, I really don't know how much money's being paid, so I honestly can't say, but I'm pretty goddamn sure that it's not gonna move the needle. So really, at the end of the day, the only thing console makers actually get out of timed exclusives is just another aspect of modern gaming that can only frustrate players more than anything else. Don't get me wrong, I think gaming's better now than it's ever been before, but the fact is, with all this crazy technology we have, everything about it should be better rather than there being pros and cons. Thankfully, nobody ever lies about games being timed exclusives except for the titles Microsoft owns, but even there we can honestly give them the benefit of the doubt and assume they weren't planning it all along. But if you are gonna tell people up front that games are only temporarily exclusive, whether it be because you have to, or because you don't want to be a dick, the fact is that timed exclusives are just a lose-lose for everybody involved. It doesn't sell consoles, it barely sells any more software on your platform, and it just annoys fans. So stop it, big console makers, or I'll open up a can of the ass whip and spray it all over you. But anyway, what do you think about timed exclusives? Do they make you want to ding-dong ditch console makers? Do they make you want to go in a coma? Or do they make you want to do both? Either way, let me know what you think in the comments below, or tell me about some timed exclusives that steamed your clams, and as always, I'll try my goddamnedest to respond to everybody. But let me tell you, if there's two people who actually would make me buy a console if they were timed exclusives, then it would definitely be today's patrons of the day, Dojin Shinji and Walu Waifu. If you want to be badasses like these two, then consider supporting FU Game Crew on Patreon for loot boxes in the mail and other wacky rewards. And if you want to make a cameo, then send pictures or videos of you rocking any FU Game Crew merch like these legendary human beings you see before you. As always, like and share this video anywhere on the internet to help this channel grow. And if you want to prove that you're not down with registered sex offenders, then go ahead and press the subscribe button if you haven't already. My name's Cameron, all one word, and I'll be back with more videos soon.
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty, thank you for your support.